Two crucial pieces of evidence just surfaced in this investigation, and together, they are completely reshaping everything. Investigators thought they knew about the days leading up to Nancy Guthrie going missing. The first is a phone call specifically, the very first call Annie Guthrie reportedly made right after the incident. Not who she called later, or who she eventually reached, but that first call. The person on the other end is now a prime target for detectives. The second clue is a purchase, a Walmart transaction Annie Guthrie supposedly made just days before Nancy went missing. A purchase a former store employee remembers vividly, both because of what she bought and the brief conversation they had. On their own, neither of these clues would mean much. But together, within the context of what investigators already know, they are revealing a complex picture. And once you hear both details in full, you will understand exactly why. Let's start with that call, because the logic guiding investigators toward it is something very few people fully understand. The first call after a crisis is always the most honest reaction, not because you are confessing, but because you simply haven't had time to fabricate a story yet. The narrative hasn't been crafted. You haven't called a lawyer. Nobody has told you what to say, what to hide, or how to spin the story. You act on pure instinct, trust, fear, and sheer necessity. And the person your instinct drives you to reach out to is someone who holds a key role in the situation. Someone you need to speak with. Someone who has to know. Someone to help control the damage before everything spirals. Investigators call this the pre-narrative window, the brief period before a controlled version of events is manufactured. And communications during this time are forensically priceless. Annie Guthrie's first phone call occurred right inside that window. That call was not to the police. In a scenario where someone close to you has just vanished, and where detectives are already involved, or about to be, the order of those calls is a crucial detail. It doesn't mean guilt. Someone in shock simply calls the people they trust. But when investigators see a first contact that isn't the police, they have to ask, what was the priority? What did Annie need to communicate, coordinate, or confirm before making an official report? Phone records prove that the detective's suspicions were correct. Here is who received that first call. According to sources close to the case, the recipient was a longtime family associate, someone known in the Guthrie circle for years. Someone with a history with the family that went far beyond casual socializing, and someone with a criminal record. That final detail sent a chill through the investigation, because calling an associate with a troubled past, long before notifying the police, right after such a critical incident, is simply not something detectives can easily overlook. It is a combination that raises immediate questions about their relationship and the true content of their call, and whether she was truly seeking emotional support from him, or something else entirely. Let's be precise about the next step in the investigation, because the scope of this analysis is massive. They didn't just look at that single call. They pulled the entire communication history between Annie and this man, analyzing every log, text thread, and messaging platform they used, going back as far as records allowed. They built a relationship timeline, mapping out exactly how often they communicated, looking for changes in call volume, or patterns on key dates, or spikes in contact that aligned with what they already suspected. Next, they analyzed the immediate context of the call, focusing closely on the exact time, the duration of the call, and any messages exchanged in the minutes right before it happened, and what communication followed, analyzing if it was an isolated incident or part of a larger chain in those critical first hours. Then, they tracked who the recipient called after hanging up with Annie, to see if information was passed to a third party. They also investigated whether the ripples of that call affected anyone else connected to the case timeline. This is relationship mapping on a federal level. It is a meticulous, systematic process that is incredibly difficult to bypass once the complete history is reconstructed. This is what behavioral analysis reveals about the difference between an emotional crisis call and an operational call. When someone is in genuine distress, processing severe trauma, and seeking comfort, their communication pattern is chaotic. Rapid dials, short, overlapping calls. They are scattered because their mind is completely fractured. They dial every confidant in their phone, one after another, desperately seeking comfort during an emotional crisis. But if there are operational priorities, data to share, or plans to coordinate, or a strategy to map out before the police arrive, the pattern shifts. It becomes cautious, with fewer calls, longer in duration, and in a precise sequence. It is not panic, but a checklist executed with cold, methodical focus. Word has spread that investigators analyzed Annie's communications after the incident under this precise lens. The real mystery is not just who she called, but whether her specific dialing pattern, that sequence, the timing and duration, matches a frantic emotional crisis or points to a highly structured plan. That subtle difference reportedly turned this phone call into the central pillar of the investigation, rather than a minor detail. This is where the legal situation for the recipient of that call becomes incredibly uncomfortable. If investigators suspect this person is hiding critical information about Nancy's mysterious disappearance, and that is the official terminology being leaked, he is no longer viewed as a mere passive witness. He is being investigated as someone guarding a crucial secret, and the legal gap between those two classifications is massive. A passive witness is merely questioned. The keeper of key evidence is aggressively pursued. Grand jury subpoenas demand testimony under oath. Refusing without a valid legal defense constitutes contempt of court. If the suspect's call logs and his subsequent communications after hanging up with Annie, along with his history with the family, contain details prosecutors already uncovered on their own, his strategic options for remaining silent shrink drastically. Factor in a prior criminal record, and deciding between cooperating or staying silent becomes a highly dangerous dilemma. Investigators know this exact scenario all too well. Labeling this individual as a key information holder reveals that the investigation has moved far past preliminary stages. They are no longer just trying to decode that call. They are chasing a much more serious target. The massive question behind all of this, the riddle currently haunting detectives, is actually quite simple. Why did she turn to him, out of everyone in her contacts, when she could have dialed anyone else? With family, close friends, lawyers, or even the police available, why did her instincts guide her straight to him? Why was someone with his past and his dark history with the family the recipient of that critical first call? Theories point to two extremes. On one side, he was simply her true confidant, his past irrelevant to the tragedy. She reached out because he was her safe haven, a private moment of comfort, meaningless to the police investigation. On the flip side, this was an operational move. He needed to know exactly what had just happened. He had to be prepared for what was coming next. Perhaps he already knew what would happen, or needed vital information to coordinate movements before law enforcement could piece together the full picture. Detectives are working tirelessly to uncover which of these two theories represents the absolute truth. Given the meticulous forensic analysis of this call, link tracing, and the study of communication patterns, combined with tracking the suspect's subsequent contacts, investigators now completely rule out any chance of a simple, innocent coincidence. This is what that phone call represents in the grand scheme, gaining immense significance with these recent discoveries. The horrifying discovery in the backyard, key DNA evidence, and the digital timeline reconstruction of Tommaso Cian's movements all align with this crucial contact, which detectives believe will expose Annie's deepest fears and secrets, showing what she decided to confess just minutes before law enforcement closed in. Physical evidence shows the what and where, but call logs expose who knew, when they learned, and what they did. Federal prosecutors need both pieces of evidence to file charges. Physical proof proves a crime occurred, but the phone records expose the dark web of conspiracy behind it. This call, and what it reveals about Annie's immediate state of mind and priorities, is reportedly one of the primary threads investigators are weaving to build that picture. That initial call is not a loose end. It is the very foundation of the prosecution's case. Now, let us analyze that mysterious Walmart meeting, which is viewed through a completely different forensic lens. Yet, it points to the exact same mystery troubling police regarding Annie's behavior before Nancy vanished without a trace. It all started with an online rumor. The tip came from someone claiming to be a former Walmart employee. After Nancy vanished, the story spread quickly through true crime circles for one very specific reason: the timing. According to the story, this employee recalled checking out Annie Guthrie days before Nancy disappeared. He remembered that specific purchase, not because Annie stood out then, but because of the item itself and their brief conversation during the transaction. The employee described the item as something for personal protection or emergencies, noting that Annie herself mentioned it was for an urgent situation. That memory did not carry any real weight until after Nancy went missing. That is the exact detail investigators find most interesting from a forensic standpoint. That is simply how witness memory operates in criminal investigations. It does not work like people think. Memory is not a recording, it is a reconstruction. and those reconstructions are shaped by everything that takes place after the original event. When a Walmart employee serves hundreds of customers a day, almost all those interactions vanish from memory within hours. They are routine, with nothing to make them stick. Only interactions that are slightly out of the ordinary survive. Details that trigger an instant emotional or mental alert, a comment, a behavior, or a choice outside the norm. That alert might not seem important at the time, but it anchors the memory in place. When that same employee later sees Annie Guthrie's name linked to a disappearance, the memory resurfaces. That red flag, which was always there, now has context, and the brain retroactively assigns value to something it randomly filed away just because it was slightly unusual. If the worker's story is real, the purchase record will confirm it. The item purchased will be identifiable, and the timestamp will be exact. Investigators will know what was bought, when, and if surveillance cameras caught the encounter the employee described. If the logs do not confirm it, and no matching transactions appear in Annie's financial history at that location, the story becomes a false memory, an error, or a fabrication. Any of those scenarios would completely rule it out of the investigation. Just because this testimony has not been publicly verified does not mean police have not already investigated it. It just means they have not yet revealed the results of that verification. And in federal investigations, deciding what forensic findings to release and when is purely strategic. Online networks and true crime communities quickly made this story go viral, and it is worth examining the pattern of that collective reaction closely. Within hours of the news breaking, amateur sleuths were cross-referencing the purchase date with the timeline of Nancy's disappearance, trying to verify the worker's identity. They were even mapping the Walmart location, comparing it with Annie Guthrie's known movements before the incident. Part of that analysis was surprisingly disciplined and methodologically sound, but other parts were pure speculation that can damage investigations and hurt innocent people by jumping ahead of the evidence. Still, the massive online interest in this story created another effect worth mentioning. It pressured investigators to address this specific lead in public. When a lead gains that much traction online, police must react not necessarily in public, but certainly internally. They must determine for sure if the story is credible enough to integrate into the case, or rule it out, instead of letting it circulate indefinitely as an open question. This pressure from viral true crime media is a double-edged sword. At its best, it uncovers tips and testimony that would otherwise never reach investigators. At its worst, it taints potential witnesses, generates false leads, and disrupts the strategic timing of the case. In this case, it is impossible to know from the outside whether the digital spotlight helped or hindered the investigation. This is the angle that makes this alleged purchase so forensically interesting, whether it gets confirmed or not. The most terrifying part of this story is not that Annie bought something sinister, but what an ordinary purchase might reveal about her state of mind days before Nancy disappeared. If the transaction is confirmed and the item was indeed for emergencies, investigators will analyze that reasoning within context. What emergency was she expecting? Was she afraid of something specific? Was she preparing for an inevitable scenario, or one she dreaded might happen? These questions do not mean the purchase was actually a crime. They only need to show suspicion, a hint of tragedy in the days before Nancy went missing. And if a store receipt backs up that suspicion, it adds another crucial piece to what Annie knew and when. It builds on that first phone call, the forensic search of the property, and the deep analysis of her messages, serving as a key piece of evidence to piece together what she knew and planned during that critical window. Let us connect those two threads. Alone, they are significant. But the bigger picture is what changes everything. Annie Guthrie allegedly made a purchase just days before Nancy went missing. An item a store clerk remembered vividly because of what it was and how she described it. Then, after the incident, her first call was not to police, but to an old acquaintance with a criminal record, someone who, according to investigators, is hiding critical information. Analyzing the timing, duration, and background details of that call became a top priority for detectives. These clues map out a crucial timeline: a suspicious purchase suggesting she knew something in the days before, and a phone call that exposes her true priorities right after the tragedy. Together, they show a clear pattern of behavior before and after, which prosecutors are building their case on. But the real question in this mystery is not whether Annie Guthrie is actually guilty of a crime. The evidence in court will decide that. Instead, detectives are asking, what did Annie know? What was she preparing for? And who did she call when everything fell apart? Her purchase suggests anticipation. The phone call reveals very clear priorities. And that mysterious contact with his dark past and secrets, sits right at the center of both questions. This is what investigators understand about behavioral patterns that the general public so often overlooks. A criminal case is not just about the crime itself. It carefully analyzes everything leading up to it: the preparations, the rising tension, and the sudden changes in behavior that signal an impending tragedy, plus the trail left behind, the reactions, the frantic phone calls, and the manipulation of data that follows. That store purchase, if verified, defines her behavior before the actual incident. It shows investigators Annie's state of mind in the days leading up to Nancy's mysterious disappearance. Whether she was planning something, sensed danger, or was just acting normal, that phone call betrays her subsequent behavior. It reveals her immediate priorities to detectives, exactly who she had to contact so urgently, and why. When the evidence before and after the incident points directly to the exact same spot, suggesting that Annie sensed something and was hiding very specific priorities, the prosecution's theory of the case becomes almost impossible to tear down. Investigators do not need to resolve every single detail perfectly. They only need a pattern. And the behavior emerging from the forensic evidence and her digital footprint, the analysis of her phone calls, and the recent testimony, all point directly in the same direction. There is another disturbing side to the Walmart testimony that nobody is talking about yet. The employee who came forward did so publicly on social media, not to detectives. At least initially. Sharing it that way says a lot about the witness's connection to the case and the information they claim to have. Exposing yourself like that in such a high-profile case carries grave dangers. It opens up that witness to severe online harassment and potential legal consequences of their own, especially if their story is fake, or interferes with the police investigation in ways they never expected. People who take those risks usually have strong motives, starting with a sense of moral and civic duty, to believing that official channels are simply ignoring the most valuable pieces of information, or maybe they just want attention from a viral story. Detectives weigh all of this when judging witness credibility. A truthful witness who speaks up because they have valuable facts and did not know how to contact police is far more trustworthy than someone who just wants to chase 15 minutes of fame. Whether detectives already questioned this former employee, got the store receipts, or verified if the story is true, or if the testimony has been completely ruled out, none of that has been made public yet. Yet the fact that this lead gained so much traction within the investigation suggests it was simply too significant to be brushed aside. This is exactly where the investigation stands right now. Fueled by these two active leads and fresh clues, forensics team investigators recovered human remains on Annie Guthrie's property. DNA testing has already begun. They pieced together Tommaso Cian's digital footprint, tracing his movements and deleted messages under intense federal scrutiny. Annie's first phone call after the incident, made to an associate with a criminal record, is critical to this case. A witness reported a suspicious Walmart purchase days before Nancy vanished, an angle detectives are already looking into. This is no longer a brand new case. We are dealing with an active investigation backed by a solid forensic file where phone records have been reconstructed, behavior patterns documented, and prosecutors are now preparing to make their move. Those DNA results will be the ultimate trigger. Once they confirm or rule out the identity of the skeletal remains found on the property, the case will shift from active investigation to formal criminal charges. Every piece of evidence will enter the prosecution's official file. That initial call, the retail purchase, the backyard discovery, and Tommaso Cian's digital tracking, it all starts coming together. Just two final details remain. First, if confirmed, that purchase would expose something deeply unsettling about the timeline, not because of the item itself, but because of what it reveals about Annie Guthrie's state of mind days before the tragedy. Knowing whether she was preparing or anticipating the events turns a simple Walmart transaction into a lead impossible to ignore. Second, Annie's first call after the incident went to someone with a record and close family ties, long before she contacted the police. This is the telltale sign of someone whose immediate priority was clearly not cooperating with the law. Whether this behavior points to a cover-up, complicity, fear, or simply turning to the person she trusted most, that is precisely what detectives are trying to piece together right now. But footprints, once left behind, cannot be erased. Detectives already have this lead, and they are not letting it go.